Over the years, we've had so many situations where, for instance, this whole sex before marriage thing, I would share, if you permit me, I would share my beliefs and you can correct me. You know, I don't really share this often because there's always this, people start to argue. Over the years, I've come to a place where I don't think God is that invested in those things. Because sometimes I look in the Bible, the part where Samuel came to talk to David and gave him the instance of the rich man and the poor man, and the rich man had all this cattle and all this, and the poor man had just one. And the rich man took the one cattle, and David was furious. I was like, who did such a thing, you know? And Samuel was like, well, you did that. He was talking about Bathsheba or whatever. And when he said, God told him that I blessed you, I called you from your father's house, I gave you cattle, I gave you land, I gave you wives. That made me feel a certain type of way. It's like, wives. And he said, if you had wanted more, I would have given it to you. It's almost like, at some point I started to feel like God doesn't really like the girl child. Because the way women were portrayed in the Bible, in so many instances, were portrayed like commodities. It's almost like as a king, you can have wives, you can do this, you can do that. And then you now hear people that will now be like, one wife, one woman, keep yourself chastity. And I'm like, I don't think God is involved in all this conversation, because the people that are like third wives, fourth wives, their children are doing well, presidents. Like, why is it this whole, why do we like to put Christianity in, or spirituality in every single thing?
That's an interesting one. One thing to realize, especially when you're looking at the Bible, the life they lived in the Old Testament.
I knew you were going to say that.
It's because it's obvious. The life is kind of different from what we live in the New Testament, and the reasons are many. The cultures they had then, they didn't have the Spirit of God inside of them. In those days, people just had, they had the religion. Basically, God was their God, and they were His people. And they had a way of always manipulating the things to favor them. So that's where, having many wives, most of them had, I don't think there's any of those guys in the Old Testament that even had one wife. Most of them, from Abraham to Solomon to David, everybody had many wives, because it was their culture at the time. And it wasn't God's ideal. What you need to realize is that God has His ideal. Every time we move away from His ideal, He's not going to kill you. Because in fact, you can even decide not to serve God. It's your right to do so. However, you can't also always choose the consequences. So that's the mistake people believe. God is not a terrorist. He's not a dictator. You can decide. I can decide to walk on the street and slap somebody. I have a right to do that, and God will be watching me. Now, what happens after that? I will also take it, because God will not be in charge of that too. So what happens is this. So in the beginning, God made it clear that He wanted one man, one wife. That's how He made Adam and Eve. It was clear. Now people took it.
I have a question about that.
So people took it and started doing what they want. And even in the New Testament, they asked Jesus that. They said, why did Moses now allow us to divorce because they were asking Jesus, is it okay for somebody to put away his wife? And Jesus was like, no, from the beginning, this was not the plan. So they asked Jesus, why did Moses allow us to do all that? He said, because of the hardness of your heart. So it wasn't God's best. But if you want to insist, this is what you want to do. God is just going to watch you do it. But you will also reap the consequences. So if you look at some of the stories, if you look at David's story, a lot happened in his house with those many wives and many children. There was rape in his house, there was incest in his house, a lot of things, there was murder in his house. But you see, people don't want to read that. They just focus on, he married many wives. Go and check the consequences. There are always consequences for everything.